The untold story about the Jehovah's Witnesses, that few mention Jehovah's Witnesses, stand out as one of the most mysterious and divisive religious groups worldwide, boasting millions of adherents across more than 240 nations. Their influence is undeniable, yet what truly motivates their beliefs and practices? Why does their doctrine evoke such intense devotion among followers while stirring rejection and criticism from those who choose to leave? In this exploration, we will delve into the lesser-known truths about Jehovah's Witnesses, from their rigid organizational hierarchy to strict behavioral codes, including the controversial ban on blood transfusions and the practice of disfellowshipping. These aspects have sparked ongoing debates and grievances worldwide. Stay with us until the end, as the revelations here might dramatically alter your perception of this religious community. Before we proceed, I invite you to share your thoughts with us. What are your opinions on groups that impose isolation on former members? Leave a comment below. Also, don't forget to subscribe to Insight Today. Give this video a thumbs up and activate the notification bell so you won't miss future content like this. Jehovah's Witnesses are known for their unwavering doctrinal stance and highly disciplined way of life. Their presence in society is unmistakable. They're recognized for their door-to-door evangelism, refusal of blood transfusions, and their apocalyptic outlook. Yet few realize the depth of their internal structure, the level of control exerted over members, and the repercussions faced by those who decide to leave. To truly understand their influence, we need to explore their origins. The movement began in the late 1800s in the United States, founded by Charles Taze Russell, a man obsessed with biblical interpretation. Russell created a Bible study group that eventually evolved into what is now known as Jehovah's Witnesses. From the outset, their movement was marked by a unique vision of Christianity, one that diverged sharply from mainstream beliefs. They rejected the doctrine of the Trinity, denied the existence of hell as a place of eternal torment, and held the belief that the end of the world was imminent. One of the most striking facets of Jehovah's Witnesses is their conviction that the apocalypse is near. According to their teachings, the current world order is under Satan's influence, and only Jehovah's faithful followers will survive the cataclysmic events to come. This intense belief has shaped their worldview for generations. They have predicted the end times multiple times, most notably in 1914, 1925, and 1975. Each failed prophecy was, however, reinterpreted by the organization. Some members were told that the end had begun invisibly, or that their calculations had been slightly off. Their obsession with the approaching end profoundly influences daily life. Jehovah's Witnesses are discouraged from making long-term plans, such as pursuing higher education or amassing wealth, since their priority must be preaching and spreading their message. They believe that their time in this system of things is limited, and they await Jehovah's imminent establishment of a divine kingdom on earth. Many sacrifice personal ambitions out of conviction, convinced that divine timing is near. Beyond these theological foundations, what fuels much controversy are their strict behavioral standards and the degree of control enforced within the community. Guided by a governing body based in Warwick, New York, Jehovah's Witnesses adhere to detailed regulations that touch nearly every aspect of their lives, from dress codes to social interactions, from career choices to family responsibilities. These rules are often presented as faithful obedience to biblical directives, but critics argue that such strict oversight limits personal freedom and fosters a culture of conformity. One of the most contentious practices is disfellowshipping, excommunication, coupled with shunning, that can dramatically sever members from their families and social circles. The organization maintains that this discipline is a necessary way to uphold doctrinal purity and prevent spiritual contamination. However, many former members describe it as harsh and emotionally devastating, often leading to profound loneliness, depression, and broken relationships. Another area where controversy persists is the organization's staunch stance on medical treatments, especially their prohibition of blood transfusions. For Jehovah's Witnesses, accepting blood is seen as a direct violation of biblical commandments. This belief has led to numerous ethical debates and life-threatening situations, especially when medical intervention is urgent. In conclusion, the complex blend of doctrinal beliefs, strict regulations, and controlling practices creates a community that is at once deeply committed and highly scrutinized. While their unwavering faith guides millions, it also raises questions about personal freedom and the true extent of their organizational influence. Understanding these hidden aspects allows for a more nuanced view of Jehovah's Witnesses, beyond their public image, and encourages a broader conversation about religious control and individual rights. Members of the Liberators are restricted from participating in certain forms of entertainment, such as celebrating birthdays, winter festivals, and other cultural events considered pagan or spiritual. They are also advised to steer clear of music, films, and books that might be deemed immoral or that promote values conflicting with the community's teachings. One of the most delicate issues they confront is their unwavering opposition to blood transfusions, rooted in their interpretation of scriptures like Leviticus 17:14 and Acts 15:29. The Liberators believe that accepting blood, regardless of circumstances, is morally wrong and a violation of divine law. This stance has resulted in numerous tragic cases where preventable deaths occurred, especially among children whose guardians refuse transfusions. While the group advocates for alternative medical procedures that don't involve blood, the outright refusal of transfusions continues to spark ethical concerns and legal controversies across different countries. Another highly controversial aspect of the group's discipline is the practice of ostracism, often called shunning or excommunication. When a member breaches the community's rules or chooses to leave the faith voluntarily, they face severe sanctions. All contact with them is cut off. Family members, friends, and neighbors are instructed not to communicate or associate with the disfellowshipped individual. For many, this process causes profound emotional distress. Parents lose touch with their children, siblings become strangers, and marriages often disintegrate under the weight of this social exile. The community justifies this harsh measure by claiming it's essential to preserve spiritual purity and safeguard others from negative influences. However, mental health professionals and scholars who study cult-like groups argue that shunning is an extreme control tactic that inflicts deep psychological wounds. Isolation, depression, and even suicidal tendencies have been documented among those subjected to this form of social rejection. Over the years, accusations have also emerged regarding the organization's handling of abuse allegations. Investigations in various countries have uncovered instances where reports of child abuse were managed internally rather than reported promptly to authorities. The community's internal policy often mandates the presence of two witnesses to validate abuse claims, which frequently leaves victims powerless to seek justice. Such restrictions have led to widespread concern over the safety and protection of vulnerable individuals within the group. Restrictions on higher education are another point of contention. Although attending university isn't explicitly forbidden, community teachings discourage members from pursuing tertiary studies. Official publications warn that university environments expose young people to worldly influences which could undermine their spiritual commitments. They promote the idea that education should focus on practical skills and manual labor rather than academic growth, aiming to prepare members for specific trades instead of wider career paths. As a result, many members limit their education to vocational or technical training, which can limit their professional opportunities and independence later in life. Despite these ongoing disputes, it's undeniable that the Liberators remain a tightly knit and highly structured community. They find a profound sense of belonging and mutual support within their congregations. The members are recognized for their discipline, diligence, and unwavering dedication to their mission. For them, adhering to the community's doctrines is not merely about obedience, but is viewed as an act of faithfulness and loyalty to their spiritual leader. This invites a fundamental question: what motivates someone to join the Liberators, and what are the consequences of leaving? Many are drawn to the organization in search of spiritual meaning, stability, or a sense of purpose in turbulent times. Yet, once inside, they discover that their freedom to think independently and make personal choices is greatly limited by a rigid hierarchy that discourages questioning authority. Leaving the group is not a simple matter. Former members often grapple with fears of societal rejection, the loss of familial bonds, and the challenges of reintegration into mainstream society after years of communal life. Throughout their lives, members of the community either find ways to rebuild and move forward, or become ensnared in a web of guilt and uncertainty. What remains undeniable is that Jehovah's Witnesses are a group that evokes a mix of admiration and criticism. For some, they exemplify unwavering faith and dedication. For others, they symbolize an oppressive system that stifles personal freedom. Yet, this is merely the surface. Numerous truths about this organization and its influence on the lives of millions still lie hidden, waiting to be uncovered. Central to their structure is a firm hierarchy built on unquestioning obedience. To grasp their inner workings, it's crucial to understand how local congregations are organized, how authority flows within the community, and the pivotal role played by their governing body, an elite group of men who dictate the rules for believers worldwide. This governing body stands at the summit of authority within the organization. Composed of a select few elders residing at their global headquarters in Warwick, New York, they present themselves as the sole legitimate interpreters of divine will. This gives them near absolute power over millions of followers across the globe. Every directive they issue, every doctrine they declare, is regarded as divinely inspired, making any disagreement or question an act of rebellion against God Himself. The organization's influence extends deeply into the personal lives of its members. Beyond enforcing strict dress codes, restrictions on entertainment, and prohibitions on certain forms of communication, they also monitor social relationships and sources of information. Adherence to rules is mandatory. Questioning or consuming material critical of the organization is considered dangerous. Members are warned repeatedly about the risks of reading books, watching documentaries, or listening to testimonials from ex-members, with the organization claiming those sources are manipulated by Satan to steer believers away from the truth. Supervision within each congregation is vigilant. A dedicated group of elders serves as supervisors, ensuring compliance with organizational rules. If a member violates these rules, whether by attending band celebrations, watching inappropriate movies, or maintaining outside friendships, they may face serious consequences. Such violations often lead to a hearing before a judicial committee, a private tribunal composed of elders. During these proceedings, the accused is questioned without legal representation or external witnesses. The process is discreet and often intense, with outcomes varying based on the severity of the offense. Depending on the seriousness of the transgression and the individual's remorse, penalties can range from mild reprimands requiring public repentance to more severe sanctions like disfellowshipping. Disfellowshipping is essentially a complete social exclusion, an exile from the community. Family members, friends, and even spouses are instructed to sever all contact with the disfellowshipped person. This practice has attracted widespread criticism, with many viewing it as social death. Former members describe it as a destructive form of ostracism, where an individual is cut off from their entire support network overnight. Stories abound of parents refusing communication with their children, siblings ignoring each other, and marriages dissolving after one partner is expelled. The organization justifies disfellowshipping as necessary to shield the community from perceived negative influences and as a motivator for repentance and return to faith. However, research indicates that the toll on mental health can be severe. Many former members report symptoms of depression, anxiety, and in extreme cases, suicidal thoughts, struggling under the weight of rejection and isolation. The psychological scars left by these practices highlight the profound impact such a system can have on individuals' well-being and their ability to lead fulfilling lives outside the community. Most individuals raised within tight-knit organizations often find their worldview shaped by the belief that the outside world holds no true value or virtue. When they are eventually expelled or choose to leave, they are thrown into an unfamiliar environment, unprepared for the realities beyond the familiar community, lacking the skills or support systems needed to navigate it. Beyond expulsion, Jehovah's Witnesses employ a subtler, yet equally isolating form of social exclusion for members deemed problematic but not guilty of serious misconduct. These individuals are subtly labeled as negative influences within the congregation. While they are not formally shunned or cut off entirely, other members are advised to minimize contact and avoid associating closely, creating an atmosphere of suspicion and restraint. This method fosters a climate of fear and control where members worry about being marginalized if they fail to conform strictly to the community's rules. Another deeply troubling aspect of the organization concerns how it handles allegations of abuse. Investigations in several countries have exposed a pattern of internal resolution rather than reporting to civil authorities. This stems largely from their doctrine known as the two-witness rule, which insists that a sin or crime can only be formally investigated if there are at least two independent witnesses. Unfortunately, in most abuse cases, such witnesses are rare, meaning many abuse reports are suppressed or ignored within the community. In nations like Australia, the United Kingdom, and the United States, official inquiries have revealed alarming facts. For example, Australia's Royal Commission on Institutional Responses to Child Sexual Abuse uncovered over 1,000 documented cases of abuse linked to the organization over 50 years, none of which had been officially reported to police. Despite mounting lawsuits and legal actions, the organization insists that such issues are spiritual matters to be dealt with internally, refusing to involve secular authorities. Alongside these scandals, internal policies and cultural practices impose additional restrictions on everyday life for Jehovah's Witnesses. A prominent example is their attitude toward higher education. While they do not explicitly forbid young members from attending universities, the organization consistently discourages secular studies, warning that pursuing such paths might lead individuals away from their faith or expose them to harmful influences. Instead, they advocate for focusing on employment that offers more flexibility for religious activities and preaching work. This perspective has often limited members' career prospects, as many grow up believing that advanced degrees are unnecessary or even discouraged. As a result, leaving the community can lead to difficult circumstances, since former members frequently find themselves unprepared for outside employment or financial independence due to a lack of encouragement to pursue broader educational opportunities. Marriage and family life are also governed by strict rules rooted in their religious doctrine. Marriage is regarded as a sacred covenant that should only occur between faithful members of the organization. Marrying outside the faith is not simply discouraged, it may be seen as a betrayal or serious misconduct that could lead to disfellowshipping. The belief that loyalty to Jehovah takes precedence over personal choice influences these practices heavily. The organization emphasizes a household hierarchy in which the husband is the spiritual and physical head of the family and the wife is expected to submit obediently to his authority, a structure drawn from their interpretation of biblical texts. Divorce is reserved for cases of marital unfaithfulness. Other reasons for separation are generally frowned upon, and the community often pressures individuals to stay in troubled marriages even when there is emotional or psychological abuse. This strict marital framework prioritizes conformity and obedience over individual well-being and autonomy, reinforcing the organization's control over members' personal lives. Within their rigid framework, the position of women is markedly constrained. They are prohibited from taking leadership roles within the community, nor are they permitted to lead prayers when men are present. While they are allowed to engage in outreach efforts and teach others, their authority within the organization remains always subordinate to that of men. Despite these limitations, Jehovah's Witnesses project an image of a unified and resilient community, portraying the congregation as a sanctuary amid a corrupt and declining world. Yet the cost of belonging is steep. Individuals must surrender their sense of personal identity, relinquish freedoms, and accept unconditionally a system that discourages questions or personal dissent. There is much more beneath the surface of this organization, especially regarding the experiences of those who have chosen to leave. Over the decades, Jehovah's Witnesses have constructed a tightly controlled system grounded in obedience and strict discipline. Adherents are expected to follow a comprehensive set of rules designed to maintain spiritual purity and align their lives with what they interpret as Jehovah's will. For outsiders or ex-members, these rules can appear as mechanisms of manipulation that restrict individual autonomy and stifle critical thinking. A cornerstone of their practice is door-to-door evangelism, a defining activity rooted in their interpretation of Matthew 24:14, which states that the good news of the kingdom must be preached in all the inhabited earth for a witness to all nations. Following this belief, members dedicate many hours to visiting homes to spread their message. What many do not realize is that participation in this activity is not optional for baptized members. They are required to actively partake in preaching, log their time, and submit monthly reports to the congregation elders. Those who fail to meet these commitments may be viewed as weak in faith and can face reprimands or pressure to increase their efforts. For many followers, this preaching work becomes a source of emotional strain. Facing rejection, insults, or even threats during door knocking is common, and such experiences can have profound psychological effects, especially on children and teenagers compelled to take part. Still, the organization teaches that these sacrifices are necessary to prove loyalty to Jehovah, framing any suffering as a test of faith. Sacrifice occupies a central place in their doctrine. Members are taught to prioritize Jehovah and the organization above all else, above their ambitions, their relationships with non-believing relatives, and even their health. A stark example of this sacrifice is their rejection of blood transfusions. As previously noted, Jehovah's Witnesses interpret Leviticus 17:10-14 and Acts 15:29 as forbidding the use of blood, even in emergencies. This belief has resulted in the deaths of thousands who refuse transfusions during critical medical procedures. Although the organization advocates alternative treatments, in many instances, the refusal of blood becomes the decisive factor between life and death. Hospitals in some countries have developed specific protocols to treat these patients without blood, but these alternatives are not always effective enough to manage urgent situations. There are testimonials from former members recounting their experiences of coercion, spiritual manipulation, and the psychological toll of their time within the organization. These stories reveal a complex and often painful reality behind the image of unity and spiritual strength the organization projects outwardly. From a young age, Sarah was raised in a community that placed immense pressure on her to conform to strict rules and beliefs. Before her scheduled surgery for a serious health issue, she was forced to sign consent forms refusing blood transfusions, despite knowing that without it, her life was at significant risk. Her community's doctrine warned against certain medical procedures, even when her survival depended on them. Instead of accepting medical interventions like blood transfusions, members were urged to trust in divine intervention, which made Sarah feel increasingly isolated and helpless. The organization she belonged to maintained a firm stance against many psychological treatments. Instead of seeking therapy or medication for anxiety and depression, members were encouraged to pray, read their sacred texts, and rely on faith for comfort. While counseling wasn't strictly forbidden, many believed that seeking professional, psychological help indicated a lack of faith. Consequently, Sarah's friends and family viewed therapy as a weakness, reinforcing her belief that her struggles were a reflection of spiritual failure. The pressure to stay spiritually resilient was relentless, and the community's sprawling social network monitored every aspect of their lives. From the clothes they wore to the music they listened to, everything was carefully scrutinized. Women were expected to dress modestly, avoiding provocative outfits, while men had to present themselves neatly and conservatively at all times. Romantic relationships were tightly controlled. Members could only date others within the community, and dating had to be supervised by the congregation leadership. Long courtships were discouraged, and many young people felt pressured to marry quickly. The community believed that early marriage was preferable as it protected members from falling into temptation. Once married, traditional roles were emphasized. Wives were expected to submit to their husband's authority, justified by their interpretation of biblical passages like Ephesians 5:22-24. It was considered the wife's duty to support her husband, unconditionally. Although the organization did not explicitly endorse domestic violence, many women faced pressure to stay in harmful relationships. Leaving a marriage was often frowned upon, and divorce was only approved in cases of infidelity. If a woman experienced emotional or physical abuse, she was frequently advised to remain, with her departure seen as a betrayal of her spiritual responsibilities. Women who sought to escape such marriages risked rejection from the congregation and being labeled as rebellious or unfaithful. Their perceived duty to uphold family unity often took precedence over their safety and well-being. The upbringing of children within this community was equally restrictive. Young members learned from an early age that the outside world was dangerous and corrupt. Their happiness could only be rooted within the confines of the congregation. Celebrations such as birthdays, Christmas, and Halloween were strictly forbidden, making children feel alienated from their peers at school. They were prohibited from participating in sports teams or clubs, as these activities were believed to expose them to negative influences. As they matured, young Jehovah's Witnesses faced intense pressure to be baptized and fully commit to the faith. Once baptized, any misstep or doubt was met with harsh consequences. For adolescents aged 15 or 16, making the wrong choice, such as dating outside the community or questioning doctrine, could result in disfellowshipping, which meant complete disconnection from family and friends. Many former members who left the organization recount symptoms of post-traumatic stress, anxiety, and depression, stemming from years of emotional control and fear of outside influence. The transition into secular society was daunting, as they had been conditioned to believe that life beyond their community would bring suffering and despair. Despite all these restrictions and hardships, the community continued to grow worldwide. Their strength lay in a highly organized structure that fostered a deep sense of belonging and purpose. For many adherents, being part of this community symbolized stability, hope, and the promise of a better future in what they called the New World, a promised paradise that sustained their faith amid strict discipline and social isolation. In the aftermath of civilization's collapse, the lingering question persists. Can this group genuinely be called a spiritual community? Or are we witnessing an oppressive system that curtails its members' freedoms? For many, leaving the organization isn't a straightforward choice. It's not just a matter of abandoning faith, it's a decision that upends their entire existence. The group becomes more than a belief system. It transforms into a way of life that infiltrates every facet of daily routine, relationships, and identity. To step away means venturing into an unknown world, risking the severance of familial bonds and friendships, often igniting a profound identity crisis. Most former adherents describe their departure as one of the most traumatic experiences they've endured. It isn't merely a spiritual rollback. It's a battle for their emotional and mental survival. Those who begin to question the group often do so when they notice inconsistencies in the doctrine, encounter injustices within the community, or face pressure to choose between their well-being and their loyalty. A common narrative among ex-members is that they come to realize their entire worldview is rooted in fear. From an early age, they're conditioned to believe that life outside the organization is perilous, that dissenters are agents of evil, and that anyone criticizing the teachings faces imminent destruction in the apocalyptic events they fear. This relentless indoctrination traps many members who remain not out of conviction but out of fear of dire consequences if they leave. Questions often emerge that shake their resolve. Why have the prophesied apocalyptic events never come to pass? Why does the organization seem so obsessed with micromanaging the lives of its followers? Why are those who seek to leave subjected to severe punishment? These doubts foment an internal crisis that can simmer for years. Even after doubt has taken root, many faithful members stay out of fear of social exile. They understand that leaving could mean estrangement from loved ones, families torn apart by the organization's strict policies. The process of exiting the group varies. Some choose a gradual withdrawal, skirting attendance at meetings, avoiding involvement in community activities, hoping to slip away unnoticed. But this strategy is often insufficient. The organization deems anyone who abandons the faith as a threat that must be shunned, regardless of whether they committed a serious offense. Others make a more definitive choice. They write a farewell letter to the leadership, formally resigning. While this approach can be faster, it also brings immediate and harsh repercussions. Once their dissociation is official, members are shunned entirely. No one within the group, not even close family, can speak with them or acknowledge their existence. The stories of those who have been disowned are heartrending. Some recall how their parents demanded they leave their homes overnight, severing ties without warning. Siblings raised together eventually stopped speaking. Children growing up in the same household no longer hear the voice of their mother. One former member recounts, "I remember the day I decided to leave. My mother looked at me and said I was no longer her child. She refused to hug me and told me to pack my belongings. Since then, I've never spoken to her again." The pain of losing family while still alive, stripped of their presence, cannot be conveyed in words. Another devastating account involves a woman who, after being expelled, found herself completely isolated. "I had no one. I lost my friends, who were all Jehovah's Witnesses, and my entire family was inside the organization. One day I was surrounded by people, and the next I was entirely alone. I had to learn how to live again from scratch." Isolation isn't the only hardship faced by former members. Many also struggle with limited access to education and employment opportunities. As previously mentioned, the organization discourages higher education, viewing it as unnecessary or even harmful to their spiritual mission. Consequently, those who leave often find themselves at a disadvantage in reintegration into broader society, facing significant barriers to rebuilding their lives outside the tight confines of their former community. Having found themselves unprepared to re-enter the workforce, a man who had departed from the organization at age 35 shared his journey. "I spent my entire life convinced that at any moment the world could end. I never focused on education or career development," he explained. "When I finally left, I realized I had nothing, no degree, no profession, no network of contacts." Starting over was terrifying. Fortunately, some individuals managed to rebuild their lives after leaving the organization. Across the globe, support groups composed of former members of Jehovah's Witnesses assist those navigating the exit process. These groups offer psychological counseling, legal guidance, and most crucially, a community that truly understands their struggles. Many ex-members find renewed purpose within these circles, discovering that life beyond the organization offers opportunities for meaningful relationships and personal growth. Still, the path to reintegration is often arduous and requires patience. An important aspect of this journey involves reconstructing one's sense of identity. For someone raised within the organization, leaving means reinventing who they are. Their identity was invariably linked to being a Jehovah's Witness. Now, they must find new reasons for belonging and purpose. Some ex-members explore alternative, spiritual paths, while others choose to distance themselves entirely from religion. What unites them is the desire to learn how to live without the constant fear of divine retribution. Despite these hurdles, many report feeling stronger and more liberated than ever before. One man who spent 4 decades as a Jehovah's Witness shared his revelation. "For the first time in my life, I can think freely. I can read what I want, talk to anyone I choose, and make my own decisions. It took me years to realize I don't need an organization to tell me how to live." Yet leaving the organization doesn't mark the end of the struggle. In numerous countries, Jehovah's Witnesses remain a powerful entity, wielding significant influence within local communities. Despite widespread reports of cover-ups of abuse, social exclusion, and attempts at control, the organization continues to expand and attract new followers. Some governments have begun to intervene. In Russia, for instance, Jehovah's Witnesses have been outlawed and designated as an extremist organization. Elsewhere, legal penalties have been imposed, including fines for failing to report abuse cases involving children. However, the fight for justice persists, as many of the organization's policies still cause harm to thousands. The threat of exclusion remains a potent tool to keep members obedient. Amid these challenges, increasing voices are speaking out. Documentaries, interviews, and online forums have become platforms for former members to share their stories and warn others about the dangers of religious control. These personal accounts raise difficult questions about the limits of religious authority. To what extent should a religious organization be permitted to regulate the lives of its adherents? Where does faith end and coercion begin? Globally, the debate about Jehovah's Witnesses intensifies. For some, they represent a dedicated community united by sincere devotion and moral values. For others, they are an overly restrictive group that exercises absolute control over the lives of its followers. Despite these differing perspectives, one truth remains clear. The influence they exert on individuals, both inside and outside the organization, leaves a lasting mark. Throughout this exploration, we have examined their history, beliefs, organizational hierarchy, and the profound effects, both positive and negative, that define their presence in the world. The repercussions faced by individuals who choose to depart from strict religious groups are numerous, but one pressing question remains. What does the future hold for faith communities like the Travelers of Eternity in an ever-evolving world? Today, these organizations encounter a host of significant hurdles. The most evident is the challenge of access to trustworthy information. For many years, the Travelers of Eternity tightly regulated what their adherents could see, read, or hear, emphasizing control over their members' perceptions and knowledge. Yet, in the age of the internet, this control becomes nearly impossible to maintain. Former members have begun sharing their journeys online, revealing internal documents from their group, exposing secretive practices, and shedding light on misconduct that was previously kept hidden. Documentaries, social media posts, and testimonies on online forums. These have all sown seeds of doubt about the organization's claims and teachings. As a result, more followers are questioning the doctrines they once accepted unquestioningly. In reaction, the leadership has responded with stern warnings against accessing or spreading what they label as apostate content. Official publications and speeches portray critical information as the work of malicious forces, often demonized as evil influences or outright satanic schemes, and warn members that engaging with such material jeopardizes their spiritual well-being and relationship with the divine. Despite these warnings, many members continue to seek out the truth on their own, challenging the organization's narrative. Another pressing obstacle is legal scrutiny. Several nations have launched investigations into the Travelers of Eternity concerning their handling of sensitive issues, especially allegations of child abuse, and their practice of excluding members who dissent or disobey rules, which they call disfellowshipping. Governments are increasingly demanding transparency and accountability, compelling the group to consider significant policy reforms. In some cases, legal actions have led to sanctions or restrictions. For instance, in 2018, the Dutch government uncovered evidence suggesting the organization covered up numerous cases of abuse, and Australia's Royal Commission found over 1,000 abuse cases within their congregations, with none properly reported to authorities. Such revelations have tarnished their image, transforming past perceptions of them as a harmless, eccentric faith community into one associated with secrecy, authoritarian control, and cover-ups. Despite these mounting challenges, the group persists and continues to grow in certain regions. Their survival hinges largely on their adaptability. Recognizing the shifting landscape of communication, they have moved aggressively into digital spheres, launching their applications, producing video, content, and leveraging social media to reach potential followers. This strategic pivot represents a significant effort to modernize and attract younger generations who are more accustomed to online faith exploration. Nevertheless, the fundamental question remains: can an organization built on strict rules, exclusivity, and controversy survive indefinitely amid an information-rich environment? Many former members argue that younger generations are increasingly skeptical of traditional authority and are less willing to accept doctrines without scrutiny. They believe the organization's influence will diminish over time as more individuals question and analyze their teachings independently. Conversely, some caution that the social control mechanisms within such groups are so potent that, even if their numbers decline, they will likely endure in some form, perhaps smaller, but resilient, persisting through ideological loyalty. What appears certain is that debates about their legitimacy and morality will continue. For some, the travelers of eternity epitomize the pursuit of spiritual truth and offer hope of everlasting life. For others, they symbolize an oppressive organization that fosters fear, discourages critical thought, and curtails personal freedom. Regardless of perspective, this story imparts a universal lesson: the critical importance of questioning and independent investigation. Faith grounded in fear or coercion is fragile. Genuine spirituality is rooted in free will, informed choices, and the willingness to seek truth. Now I invite your thoughts. Do you see the Travelers of Eternity as a sincere faith community, or are they merely an organization wielding control over their members? Have you or someone you know had experiences with them? Share your insights. I'd love to hear your perspective. Hey, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to Divine Whisper, and tap the notification bell so you never miss out on more videos like this. See you in the next one.